Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball
with Eir Sport. Every Champions Cup and now every Pro 14 game only on the Eir Sport pack.
And you're very welcome along to this edition of Monday Night Rugby. We are joined in studio by Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent. You're very welcome along, Rory. And also joining us on the line is former Ireland head coach Eddie O'Sullivan. Evening, Eddie.
Good evening.
Mixed results for the Irish sides across the Pro 14 this past weekend. Munster and Leinster both tasting defeat on the road. Glasgow 25, Munster 10, the score from Scottstown, where Eir Scarlets, Leinster again unable to win away to the Welsh side. 23-21, the final score there in favour of Scarlets. But victories again for Ulster, who are providing great entertainment at Kingspan Stadium so far this season. A 1-point victory for them this week over Edinburgh. 30-29 is how it finished there. And Connacht beating Zebre, picking up the bonus point in the process. 32-13. But from an Irish perspective, in terms of news this week, Dominic Ryan's retirement sadly has jumped to the fore over the course of the last 2 days, becoming the sixth Irish international to quit because of concussion over the last couple of years. And Rory, it's becoming a worrying trend, along with the awareness of concussion and the highlighting of it as an issue and the better treatment of it, has come these spate of retirements, because it is being treated more seriously. It's being spotted better, but there are questions over how Ryan was treated, because he was let on the pitch in the immediate aftermath of the blow that ultimately has led to his retirement, it seems.
Yeah, I think the word you used at the start was sad, and ultimately when you start off with this, it is very sad. And when you read the way Dominic Ryan spoke about it in his interview with John O'Sullivan on Saturday, he couldn't help but come away feeling sorry for him in terms of the amount he put into his career, and for it to be all taken away from him at 28 because of this injury is a terrible way for it all to end. And you know, he had a good innings. He felt he could have got more out of it, and he made a move to Leicester for a fresh start. And after a couple of games, that fresh start was taken away from him when he tried to tackle George North. Admitted himself, he got his head on the wrong side. All he was thinking of was trying to stop him from scoring a try. Got knocked out. It was diagnosed as being winded. He didn't do a HIA. He didn't do the return to play protocols. He played the following week, and it happened again. This time it was diagnosed, and from there, it's very well laid out in that piece about basically, you know, at that point he went into the proper kind of channels and was, you know, seeing a neurologist. You know, was given 12 weeks off. When he came back, he still didn't feel right. Goes through, as John Fogarty, Bernard Jackman have done before, and others, the kind of the really dark side of it, you know, having to wear sunglasses indoors, you know, not feeling right when he was home at Christmas, not being able to, you know, communicate with his family the way he wanted to, you know, people starting to become worried about him until he tries to come back against Castra. He gets knocked out from just a glancing blow at one stage, and he tries to come back against Castra. It just doesn't feel right, and ultimately is stood down for the rest of the season, loses his contract, and then goes to the neurologist, says, "Where do I stand?" And the neurologist tells him, "You shouldn't play again." So it is a story that we're more familiar with now than we ever were, which is a good thing in some ways, because the sport is trying to get to grips with it, and players are not being forced to play beyond when they should. But there is a worry in the way that it was handled, in the fact that it was missed, that it was seen as being a winding. I mean, it was a massive thundering collision with George North. He would have been winded as well, but you know, someone you'd hope should have spotted it. There are so many different things in place now. You know, clubs have it. I was just talking to someone this morning about the Pro 14 and Leinster and the Dragons this weekend, and all the clubs that are playing against each other, each will have a screen where they're watching for these things. They'll have an independent doctor at all the games. They're doing their best, and sometimes cases will slip through the net. No system is foolproof, but it is a worry, given all we know that it could have happened last season. Ultimately, it's a very sad story, and it's a cautionary tale, and I think it's one of those things that when people picked up that piece on Saturday and read about it, with parents who have kids playing the game, anyone who's going into the pro game, it was a pretty sobering read.
Yeah, Eddie, that's the thing, when you read through the list of symptoms, and Rory's kind of laid some of them out there. You see sleepless nights, migraines that lasted 2 weeks, flashing white lights in his vision, dizziness, nausea and pounding pressure in his head, and the sheer span of all of these symptoms as well. It just shows you what these players are going up against when they are entering into those challenges.
Well, it's just part and parcel of rugby now, and I know World Rugby are doing their best to minimise these risks in terms of changing the tackle laws and all that, and how we clean out rucks, you know, as well, which is another area where people are getting dinged in the head. You know, they can do what they like, but it's still a collision sport, and it's going to happen. And now we've got, athletes, such as big, huge men that are running very fast. It's a collision sport. People change direction. It's part and parcel of the game. And I suppose the systems they have in place are picking it up now. But this isn't going away. It's just, it is a factor. I think it's a bigger factor for the game in terms of, I know in America, a lot of parents really don't want their kids to play football in America because of the concussion issues. And now that they're more aware of the consequences that, even these, you're almost better off having a bad concussion because it's automatically spotted and you're treated. Whereas you have these mini concussions where you actually play on and you get 3 or 4 of them back to back, they can be the more dangerous ones. But look, it's almost impossible. I don't think it's possible to eradicate it. It's part of the game. It doesn't help the game. And there's risks in it. And look, it's an awful thing to say, but concussion is just another word for brain damage. And can you recover from it? Most people do, but you get these exceptional cases where somebody doesn't, and it's very sad when careers end that way. But as I said, Dominic Ryan's not the first, and he certainly won't be the last. And I think it's going to be in rugby as long as we allow tackling, and it's a pity, but it's there. They're not going to change it.
Eddie, it's put Jordan Murphy on the back foot as well in temporary charge at Leicester. He was quoted as saying, and being asked about it over the course of the weekend, saying, I think there's a lot of criticism. I was actually one of the first guys to Dominic on the field when the media said he was concussed, but I spoke to him and he wasn't. He was fine. Now, it's all well and good for Jordan Murphy. He's obviously played the game at the highest level to go to a player and ask him, is he concussed, and to see if he's concussed. But Jordan Murphy, in a conversation, brief as it is, on the pitch, has no way of telling if the player is concussed. No, absolutely.
It's not. Sorry, Rory, I'm cutting across you. Sorry.
No, go on ahead, Eddie.
It's not. It's a medic's job to assess concussion, not a coach's job. So the coach can ask him whatever he wants, but he should be assessed by a medic, and the medic makes a decision. I mean, I think there's been a few missed. Now, again, I don't think people are out there intentionally avoiding assessing people for concussion. They did genuine mistakes. I remember Jordan North himself, who was involved in the collision with Dominic Ryan, the initial collision. He went down on one game as well with Northampton, and on television it was obvious that he'd taken a knock to his head, but the people around him didn't spot that in time, and he played on for a while. So there are going to be these moments in the cut and thrust of the game where a fella looks to be okay and you'll find out after he wasn't. That's a pity, but certainly I think they've got to be really careful that if there's even a semblance of a collision of any sort on the head, they've got to get a medic to that player and let the medic clear him. And the medics are good. They do their job well. You can trust them, and they have all the tools to do it. But a coach saying, I talked to him, he's all right, doesn't wash, that's really just kind of dodging it a bit. So I think it's not really his job. It should have been a medic's, and they've just got to be more aware that there's a potential head injury in almost every contact. I mean, it's so easy to get your head the wrong side, or a player changes direction at the last second. So you just got to be ultra cautious. And if somebody looks like they may have had a contact to the head, they should be assessed immediately. Stop the game. Nobody's going to complain about that.
Yeah, Rory, in terms of keeping an eye on things closer to pitch level and having people qualified to kind of spot these things, like obviously you want a medic in there. Is there any, I suppose, from the game's authorities' point of view, of having people better trained closer to the front line?
Well, I think, yeah, with their pitch side, but there's also, as I said, people watching every piece of action with I think it's Hawkeye technology on screens where they can slow-mo go back and pick it out, and we've even seen in the Rugby Championship this season that referees are starting to step in and say, I think it was there was an incident, David Pocock pointed out that an All Black had, he thought it was Liam Squire had been concussed, and the referee took a look at him and Squire ended up paying on. In France, they brought in a blue card where referees can identify a suspected concussion and get the player off the pitch. The game is trying to catch up with this as much as it can, and it's not in Leicester Tigers' interest to miss this, because Dominic Ryan's an asset that they paid for last season and weren't able to use. So, I wouldn't see any reason why Leicester would force him to go again and miss it out deliberately. Jordan Murphy's maybe on the defensive a little bit, but I think, unfortunately, human nature dictates that some things will be missed. Then the game is trying to regulate against it. Alan Clark had a really interesting suggestion at the weekend, the Ospreys coach, who actually was Dominic Ryan's under-20s coach, to introduce a 40-20 rule like Rugby League, whereby if you get a touch finder from inside your own half that goes out in the 22, you get possession back. And it's a way of keeping players in the backfield to limit the amount of big collisions. And, innovative stuff like that might not be the answer, but people thinking about ways of reducing the collisions, reducing the number of defenders in the front line, maximising the space on the pitch, that's all the things that, as well as having more medics and all that sort of stuff, putting a line on someone's jersey as they're trying to suggest this is being trialled this year, where a nipple line below which you have to make your tackle. That's very difficult to regulate. And players, when they're if you watch, when a team is on the line defending its own line and when a team's attacking their own line, there's absolutely no regard for players' own safety, because all they care about is stopping or scoring a try. And whatever you do everywhere else in the pitch, it's absolute chaos on the line. And it's really hard to make a tackle above or below anything at that stage, because players are going low hard. So injuries will happen. So the game is, as I said, a collision sport. You can only do so much to protect the players. But I think the game needs to innovate a bit and find new ways of trying to diminish the amount of front-on collisions that are going on.
Eddie, Ryan even admits himself that he wasn't in the best position to make that tackle, and that ultimately he kind of paid the price for it in that regard. The nipple line thing, I don't know if that's going to make much change, or if that can be properly regulated the way it is. The rule that Rory's outlined there, that's taken in from rugby league, changes to the game are kind of something that you have to balance against your point that this is just part of it. This is what is going to happen, unfortunately.
Well, I think Rory's right, Anton, that maybe we can tweak in the laws that incentivises players to defend the backfield, and there's less traffic on the gain line where all the collisions are. I think it's smart. But, you've got to think those through, because there's always unintended consequences to law changes, and then coaches find a way around it and something farcical happens. But in terms of players making tackles, look, this is their livelihood. The one thing a player never wants to do is miss a tackle. So most of these guys will put their head into a propeller to stop a guy. The last thing they're thinking of, they try to get their head behind, but it's the only way to get a guy down is put their head in front. They're going to stick their head in front. So we can't expect the players to themselves almost protect themselves. There's too much at stake for them. They're not going to make the right decision. They'll just do whatever it takes to put the guy down. And we can coach them all you want and tell them to put their head behind, but when the rubber hits the road and they've got to make a tackle to stop a try or whatever, they're going to stick their head in any side they can to stop it. And it's a pity, but look, I think if we can tweak the laws a little bit to make more space on the gain line, that's a probably smarter way to go about it than drawing lines on players' jerseys, because that will turn the game into, it could be farcical, and you'll have high tackles called. There was no risk to anybody. And we're on the bubble with a few of those. I've seen a few calls made where really they were just made because the law said so. There was no danger to the player. But people say, well, it's better to get those wrong on that side of the line. And I agree with that. But rugby as a sport, the traction for rugby, as in NFL football or any collision sport, is the players trying to play skillfully under the pressure of physical contact. And that's not going to change, because if we played tag rugby tomorrow in the Pro 14, nobody will come to the game. That's harsh reality. So we're kind of stuck with the fact it's a collision sport, and all we can do is try and innovate and protect players. But listen, it's never going to stop concussions. We can try and minimise them, we can try and manage them, but it's going to happen, and it's going to be part of the game. And it's not an attractive aspect to the game. You have to think about it from your own kid's point of view. But it's a fact of life. It's like climbing a mountain. There's always a chance you'll fall off it,
Yeah, and ultimately, Rory, the sad thing is here, we've got a player should be entering the prime of his career, has had to retire.
Yeah, and Dominic Ryan built his reputation on his tackling and his physicality. And I remember reading about him being, shining as an under 15 and forcing himself onto a Leinster tour of South Africa, based on the fact that in Leinster trials, playing for one of the least or less fashionable schools in Gonzaga, he shone because he threw himself into everything. He was a physical player. He played on the line, and sadly, he, like another Gonzaga player before him, Kevin McLaughlin, has had to retire at this age. And Dominic Ryan wasn't apologising for the fact that that he played that way. I think he knew when you play on the line, you run the risk of these things happening, and it's a really unfortunate way for it to end. And it is happening too much. But I think Eddie makes some very valid points there. It's a tough game. It's a physical game. Concussion will happen. It's trying to minimise it and just reduce it is the only thing.
Yeah, and we wish Dominic Ryan all the best in his retirement, as early, sadly, as it has come. We want to get back to last weekend, but first, the Conor Murray situation. I know, Rory, that Johan van Graan or the Munster medical team have at least offered some degree of clarity as regards Murray's situation.
Yeah, it was just a release today. I wasn't down at Munster today, but there's a release today saying it's a neck injury, which is what was reported initially. So a bit of a step forward in terms of knowing what's going on, but still no timeline. The noises from the players' camp are pretty positive. hopefully he'll be back sooner rather than later. Hopefully European Cup time or somewhere around then.
Yeah, the hope, Eddie, we saw that he was going to be pushed back. We knew he was going to be excused pretty much from the opening couple of rounds of the Pro 14. The hope he would be in place in situ for those opening couple of games in the Champions Cup. Again, it was that vacuum of information that we've seen players operate in before, the likes of Jamie Heaslip. I know things were rather quiet about his injury situation. Ultimately, that didn't turn out the best for him. Touch wood, from a Conor Murray situation and from everyone's point of view, we're going to get to see him back by October, November time.
Yeah, it's frustrating in a way because everybody is genuinely interested in players and how injured are they. It's just part of the narrative around the game, and I just think at times, certainly around the Irish team, it's the drip feed of information where nobody knows what's going on, and this reticence to come up front and say off the bat, look, this is wrong with the player. And I never understood that. I mean, when I was Irish coach, I didn't hide injuries in the sense of if a player got injured the day before and he was 50-50, you could see the logic in not telling everybody he had a bit of a shoulder problem. But when someone's injured, they're out, and people want to know. They're genuinely concerned for the player. So I don't know what all the kind of state secret stuff is about. It comes out gradually, like pulling teeth. I don't understand why they just can't come up front and say, look, Conor's got a neck injury, here's the prognosis, we hope he's back in time, and in the meantime this is what's going to happen, and then you can move on. But it almost feeds a narrative then everyone's trying to find out, and I think they could handle these things a lot better, to be honest with you. I mean, it's not rocket science to tell everybody. Everyone knew he was injured. As Rory said there, everyone suspected it was a neck injury. Now it's been confirmed. Now we hope it's going to be sorted, but it's about dialogue with the public as well, and people let know what's going on, because we are genuine supporters of the game and we're interested. That's the thing I find frustrating, that there's this reticence to share information that's really no risk to share it to anybody. And that's what it must be tough for people like Roy there, who writes in a newspaper every day trying to find out information that the people are asking about. So I think they could do a lot better around that stuff. We've had it before. I mean, even the one I kind of chuckle about is Paul O'Connell ripped his hamstring off the bone against France in the World Cup, and they were talking about him being available to play against Argentina the week later, which was asinine. Everyone knew he had a better chance of cycling to the moon on a bicycle than playing against Argentina. And in fact, he retired after that with the injury. But again, there was talk around the tournament, he might be back for Argentina. I mean, everybody knew anything about it, knew he was gone, because that was a severe hamstring injury. So, this kind of, I'm frustrated by that. I don't think there's any need for it, and they should reconsider that, carry on.
The Heaslip scenario, going back to it, I remember him sitting where you are now, Rory, and saying at the time, before he announced his retirement, that his medical information is his own, and you wouldn't necessarily walk up to a general member of the public and be all like, what were you in hospital for last Tuesday, Tom? I mean, what was all that about? You'd never get away with it, and they tell you, rightly probably, to shag off. Yeah. Whereas Heaslip's, he wanted to keep things to himself. Most players, and through their provinces or through their clubs, these things will get out there. We've seen a theme of this now, whether it be Jared Payne with Ulster in Ireland, whether it be Heaslip with Leinster in Ireland, and now with Conor Murray with Munster. Is there a correlation between the three, that we're not hearing exactly what is going on or what has gone on with those players?
I think there's been a pushback from some of the senior Irish players who feel that their information should not necessarily be out there. There's contractual issues, there's insurance issues, particularly when a player's career is in jeopardy, like Jamie Heaslip and Jared Payne's were. And I think everyone can have a certain degree of sympathy with that. As far as we know, Conor Murray's injury is just an injury that's going to keep him out for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So I don't see the harm in saying he's got a neck problem, he's going to be out for between 4 and 8 weeks. If it's less than that, that's a good news story. If it's more than that, you just update that timeline as you go along. I don't see the issue with that, but then I'm a journalist who's looking for information. If you're a player in the last year of his contract, which Conor Murray is, maybe you don't want that information being out there. If you're the RFU and the All Blacks are coming and you're going to have to play Kieran Marmion or a couple of others, and you're uber paranoid within the Irish management, potentially you don't want them doing their work on Kieran Marmion or John Cooney or whoever it would be. Not that I don't think the All Blacks are really thinking about Ireland right now, but someone in there will probably be starting to run tape, and that maybe is a bad news story you want to get. Look, I'm completely on Eddie's. My feelings would be completely aligned with what Eddie said earlier. I think the more transparency, the better. I don't see the reason to hide these things. I can understand if a player's career is in jeopardy. I see that point. But from a general run-of-the-mill injury that's going to keep a guy out for 6 to 8 weeks, I just don't understand, and it creates a vacuum which leads to us talk. We probably wouldn't be talking about Conor Murray now if they'd said it 2 weeks ago. We just take it as an accepted fact that he's going to miss a couple of games. don't get it, but it's increasingly creeping in.
If you want to get a chance to win some amazing prizes across the season, be sure to get involved in the conversation in the comments section with your thoughts right now. Opinions or questions as well are more than welcome. The best comments will be given the chance of winning off the ball goodies, matchday tickets and more, with thanks to Heineken. Eddie, it seems as if on the Murray front that Munster are definitely missing him. I know it wasn't necessarily a full strength side that lost away to Glasgow. We saw with Johan van Graan's demeanour in his post-match interview afterwards, he's usually a guy who's a glass half full kind of character. He very much wasn't when speaking to Eir Sport in particular after the game. Munster didn't impress, and it looks like so far they have missed that kind of spark that Murray can offer them.
I think they were pretty shocked the way things panned out. I think they knew it was going to be a tough game up in Glasgow, but I think what shocked him is that they were actually blown away in the first half. And Glasgow would probably be upset they didn't kick on and get the bonus point. And Munster did circle the wagons at half time and had a better second half, but the game was over at half time. So I think they would just be taken aback by how they were just locked into their own half, and they were drowning at times. They just couldn't get their hands on the ball. They couldn't keep the ball when they had it, and they were just being squeezed to death. It could have been very embarrassing if the second half was like the first, but in fairness, they did, as I said, kind of fix things. And then I suppose the other thing was JJ Hanlon had a bit of a meltdown. He had a kick blocked early in the game, and then he had that really dreadful mistake where he dropped the ball on the goal line, and it led to the third try, and that killed the game. And he got reeled ashore early in the second half, and Carberry came on, but Carberry was pushing a rock up a hill. And I just think that there's a bigger question. Where are we now? 2 weeks in, Carberry hasn't started the game, and I think Van Grant has to start the next weekend. Even if JJ Hanlon had played well last Friday night, Carberry didn't go to Limerick to sit behind JJ Hanlon, and that wasn't the deal when he agreed to go. And I think the notion that he had to play and fight for his place is really semantics. He's number 2 out half the country. He's bolted into number 10 shirt in Munster. He'd never have driven across the Nolan's Cross. He thought he had to fight for his place down in Limerick. That's what he's there for. It's to play the second role to Johnny Sexton and play for Munster. So all that's going on in the background, and I just don't think it helps things. But I'm not panicking for Munster, because if you look at the fact that they've got Peter O'Mahony, CJ Stander, Keith Earls, Andrew Conway, and Niall Scannell are all going to rock up. That changes things for them, but I think they'll be smartened from the way they were put away last Friday night. But I don't think there's any panic at the moment. But I think they do need to start getting get Joey Carberry on the field and let him start running the game, because I will say one thing is he's fantastic at the line, but his game management needs some brushing up. He does kick the ball away at times aimlessly, and he does need to get a handle on bossing guys around the field he's going to be with in the big games. And I think, I can't imagine he won't be starting next weekend against the Ospreys in Cork. Yeah,
the Ospreys he has to start, really, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think this weekend we're going to see the fit Ireland internationals, all of them, back in, at least on the bench, maybe for a couple of the lads who had quite a big workload in Australia, but I think they'll all be involved. I think everyone except for Niall Scannell that Eddie mentioned, I would expect to be playing at the weekend. And I think last weekend exposed the fear that we've had with Munster over the last couple of years, that we thought might have been improved by the signings they've made this year. But when their senior internationals are away, their depth still isn't where Leinster's maybe is, whereby they're consistently able to perform in places like Glasgow and get results, which are the ones that will get you the home semi-final at the end, which is what Van Graan that's what Van Graan looked back on after losing away in the RDS in the semi-final last year, that they need to get those results. So I thought it was interesting that I think Eddie makes a good point, but I think Carberry and Tadhg are both being managed by the RFU at the moment. They're being drip fed back in. But when Billy Holland went down midway through the first half and they were getting absolutely bullied, Van Graan had 2 second rows on the bench, one of whom was covering the back row, and Tadhg Byrne, who is the best player, who has been the best player in this competition for the last 2 years, and he Finian Wycherley, who is a good player but is very inexperienced, and he went for Wycherley. Now I think that was Byrne was only down to do a half. He couldn't bring him on early, and I think sometimes you got to break the glass and go, I'll take the consequences of that phone call on Monday. Get the top lad in there, get your physicality up. Byrne was really good in the second half. Wycherley played well as well. The other thing I think that was exposed was that Munster's forward skills are still not where they need to be, because they actually mounted a pretty impressive second half comeback. I think Van Graan's mood was probably similar at half time, and he got a response, and they did some things really well, created some really good openings, but time after time They were knocking the ball on after making a line break. So a couple of things that held them back last season look like they're holding them back a little bit at the start of this season, which is a bit of a concern. But I think, with their internationals back, they're really good. When they've everyone fit, Chris Cludet's back this week as well. When they have their top players in, they're as good as anyone. The problem is when you strip a couple of them out or you hold them back for international purposes, it's not, the depth isn't as good as some of the other provinces, and that's going to be an issue. And it cost them in Glasgow, so they were blown away in that first half.
Squad management then, Eddie, is going to be a huge thing for Munster this season. Obviously, they're at the behest of the IRFU as regards what they can do with their internationals, but getting the other players that we've seen, there was a bunch of first caps this past weekend, there's a bunch of inexperienced players in there. It's getting them up to speed and knowing that you can build, I suppose, a trust level with them is going to be huge for Van Graan this season.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point Rory makes about the depth. There's very few teams actually have the same, in Europe, have the same depth as Leinster have, as we've seen, But certainly Munster, they do struggle with the internationals away, but at the same time, I think even when they're on the field, we saw last year that they do have to open up their game a little bit. And a big part of that, I think Carberry is the key to that. I mean, he can make a lot of things happen, but he needs to be on the field with these guys week in, week out. You don't just flip a switch and run on the field and everyone gels together. And a couple of days training in Limerick isn't going to bring that on. So I think Carberry is key, and he's got to get on the field. They've got to get the guys who are going to be in the trenches with him as early as possible out there with him. But there is a problem. There is a certain problem with the management thing, which is in situ for 15 years. I brought it in. It's become very micromanaged now, and guys are in and they're out, and they're in for half a game, and I just wonder at times, is it so micromanaged that guys find it hard to hit a run of form, Most players will play every week if they're asked. Fellas don't ask for time off, and I think they need to be protected from that themselves. But I think if you can get players, give them a run at it. And I thought some of them are back pretty early now, obviously. So they will be taking breaks down the track. And probably the other thing that upsets most people is a lot of these breaks are taken during the inter-pros when everyone's looking forward to, Leinster and Munster knocking lumps out of each other and so forth. And you'll find that they pitch up missing 5 or 6 internationals. So I think that whole management area has become so micromanaged, it's hard to know what's going on. I mean, I certainly lost track of what way they're doing it. It's hard to tell, and I suppose with all this, with all the information they have now on the sat navs, they can tell them how often they scratch their nose in a game. So that's all being probably fit into the equation. So from that perspective, when you have the depth Leinster have, you're certainly better to cope with that stuff. But I don't think any problems. Like certainly Ulster don't have that many internationals, so it's not as burden on them. Neither is Connacht. But Munster, as Rory says, have a serious number of internationals who they depend heavily on the big days out. And when they're not around, things don't run well, and they're vulnerable. And as I said, like these games that you lose early in the season, they can cost you at the far end of the season, and you won't know till you arrive there. So they're important games in that context also.
As a spectacle, Rory kind of suffers in that regard, in that a lot of the results you can almost put asterisks beside them and say, yeah, they lost, but they're also missing X amount of players, and that was not because of any injury crisis. It was because they're preserving them for the Champions Cup, or they're preserving them for the All Blacks and the Autumn Internationals upcoming, and there's a lot of game management going on, and that hurts the Pro 14 to a degree.
Yeah, it does, but it also benefits the Irish national team, and when they're lifting the Grand Slam and when they're winning in Australia, we'll all look back on the fact that the players have been managed through the season, and that's a source of pride from the IRFU's point of view. And it's about being able to manage it, and not everyone has the resources that Leinster have. They used 55 players last season and came out with a home semi-final and won the competition. So it's a squad. This competition above all else is a test of your squad, and I think Leinster, the Scottish and Welsh teams don't have the same level of interference that coming from above, for want of a better phrase. So Glasgow have gone full out for the first 2 games, and are now have taken a lead in their conference. And Scarlets are really, really competitive, even though they lost in Ulster and almost we're tied against Leinster. They're able to take a full run at this competition. But when it comes to the business end of the season, when it comes to when they're getting blown away by Leinster in semi-finals, does that work against them at that point? It's a balancing act. It's the reason that Pro 14 doesn't compete on a level footing with the top 14 and the Premiership, but then the Premiership and the top 14 both undermine their national teams in some ways as well.
Eddie, it's something you touched upon there as regards the diminishing inter-pro rivalries, because we don't necessarily see the big guns going up against each other, but what we have seen develop over the past couple of years, and that was borne out on Friday night, is the rivalry between Scarlets and Leinster. is becoming quite something and becoming quite tetchy, and at times has a habit of boiling over. We saw with James Lowe's try the slide in with the knee from one of the Scarlets players. We've also seen a lot of fist pumping and kind of over egging the pudding from Scarlets at certain breakdowns as well. But nonetheless, it's entertaining.
I think it's good for the game that these teams are taking it so seriously. I mean, Scarlets are the best team in Wales and Leinster are the best team in Ireland. So when they go toe to toe, there's a bit of bragging rights there, and that's good for the tournament. And I think Leinster would have gone to Scarlets on the weekend with, quietly primed that they're going to take a scalp, because they haven't won there for a long time, and they were undone. And the funny part about it is, I felt that as the rain poured down, I fancied Leinster more, because Leinster for the last couple of weeks have got results by using their power game. Scarlets are not a power team; they're more of a run and gun team. And if I think the winning score came from Scarlets, just a turnover around the Leinster 22, and suddenly they were under the sticks. But I still think it's good for the competition that you have these ding-dongs, because you only tend to get those ding-dongs on a weekly basis when, like, Connectly play, or Scarlets play the Ospreys, or Munster play Ulster, and they're great for the competition, those kind of derby environments. And if two teams from outside, like Leinster and Scarlets, have a derby flavour about it on an average Saturday afternoon, I think that's good for the competition. But it's because they're the two top teams, and Scarlets felt they didn't play at the par last year in Dublin. I would just in the final of the Pro 14, I would say they didn't play at the par because they weren't allowed to. But either way, they probably want to make a statement on Friday night, and that certainly was the way to do it, was to get a result.
Yeah, you'd imagine, given the results so far this season, Leo Cullen's looking to be taking as many positives as he can from the first two games. One of those positives has got to be the performances of Rhys Ruddock. I mean, he's looked fantastic in the Leinster pack so far this season.
He had a similar start last year. He was really, really good, and I thought coming into November he was putting serious pressure on Peter O'Mahony, which O'Mahony responded to in kind. So he's a really, really good player. He's a leader. I don't particularly like him in the 7 shirt. I think they could do it getting Josh van der Fleer in there with his energy and his work right around the breakdown. But no, look, Ruddock's a really classy player who has less caps than he probably, I think injury and a combination of injury and competition have denied him the amount of caps that he should have had, but he's really, really valued in Leinster. They see him as one of the most important players, and he'll go down as one of their best acquisitions, a guy that they plucked out of the Ospreys Academy 10-12 years ago.
Yeah, Eddie, before we wrap up, a great win for Connacht, 32-13 over Zebre. Andy Friend's era starting pretty well out west, and also we've seen Ulster just be the most entertaining prospect we could have them be in these opening couple of games, with those narrow victories, and most recently with that 1-point win over Edinburgh. They're able to get scores. John Cooney, with a contract extension, looks even more reinvigorated than he did last term. This is exactly what Ulster needed, was on-pitch fare to, I suppose, reinvigorate that crowd up at Kingspan. Yeah,
look, Ulster are a very delicate flower, let's be honest. They had a horrendous year last year, but on and off the field, and they've had a lot of false resets, under Mark Anscombe, then Les Kiss. So, this season is really important for them. And McFarland, who only arrived in a couple of weeks ago, really has to hit the ground running. He's not going to get a season to bed in. So it was really important they won the last 2 weeks, no matter how they did it. And again, it was John Cooney at the death, kicking a penalty. And can you think about it, Cooney, when Ruan Pienaar left a couple of years ago, there was dismay up Ulster at how they're going to replace him. And in fairness, Cooney, backed himself to fill probably one of the biggest pair of boots in World Rugby, and he's done fantastically well for him. So it's been an inspired decision for Cooney from his point of view, from Ulster's point of view, to have him. But the thing for Ulster is they're now entering a stage where they could really batten down the season and kind of get all the cobwebs of last year out of the way and kick on. And they've got 2 games in South Africa coming up next 2 weeks. They should win those. And then they head into a very critical period in October where they play Munster away, Connacht at home, and then 2 European games. Now, if they actually go through the next 6 matches and they're in good shape, they don't win all 6 of them, but I think they would have established a good season themselves, and people will rock on. Look how awkward it could have been. Had they not got those 2 late penalties in the last 2 weeks, they'd be 0-2 now. And, the grumbling would start again already, the flashbacks to last year. So in that sense, having got those dodged 2 bullets, I think, to be honest, 2 late penalties, you won't get those every week. things are going well for them, but they're in a delicate place. They need to win in South Africa, and then they need to win a couple of games, a couple of pro matches, and hopefully a couple of European games, and that steadies the ship. And then I think they really could kick on. Like they just need to find that kind of confidence that we know they can score tries. They have a great back line. I think Coetzee being back has stiffened up the pack, so they're in a good place, but it's a delicate flower still, and they need to keep their foot on the pedal.
Setting aside all the off-field stuff, it was actually Europe that was the litmus test for Ulster last season, as it has been, of course, over the past number of seasons, and they've disappointed consistently. It's there, really, and they haven't been helped by the draw either this year, that they're going to be judged, really, on the playing front.
It is, but I think that your draw is dictated by your Pro 14 position at the end of the season, and I think people would forgive them a decent pool exit if they were able to put together a good run in this competition, because I think this competition's profile is rising a little bit. I think the competition, looking at games across the board, even Treviso scoring a last minute try in the scenes over there, there's a sense a little bit, maybe it's just the start of the season, but there's a sense that the standard is rising a little bit. So for them to get off to a good start in a really competitive conference is a pretty good thing. Their pool will be tough. There's probably question marks about some of their squad depth, a bit like Munster, but they have signed well in Addison. Their fullback Cooney's playing well, and as Eddie said, Coetzee is a massive. He's like a new signing. I'm sure Les Kiss is looking at him flying and going, "Gee, I wish I had him," because he makes such a difference. He hardens up their ball carrying game so much. So it's an encouraging start, but it's 2 games in, so there's still a long way to go.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's not get worried if you're from a Munster perspective. Our rugby coverage brought to you by Eir Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. I'll have more rugby throughout the week, and thanks to Eddie and to Ruaidhri for this evening.
Thanks, Richie.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball
with Eir Sport. Every Champions Cup and now every Pro 14 game only on the Eir Sport pack.